It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. A beautiful day in the neighborhood. Won't you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? So, good morning, class. I'm doing my best Mr. Rogers impersonation here because I'm putting on the proper protective equipment for starting my day as an archaeologist. We are going to be doing our first site walkover. This is the initial site walkover that familiarizes yourself with this new project that you have decided to take on. In your case, it's your backyard. In my case, it's my backyard. But this is going to be appropriate for any project that you might do from here on out. You get a contract, you get a research grant, you go and you just scope out the site first. Look for hazards, look for things you might need to consider down the road. That's what we're going to do today. All right, so first of all, you can see why I put on my reflective vest. This street is fairly active. People drive about 55 miles an hour on it. Anytime you're within range of traffic, you're going to want to put on a safety vest. So I am right across the street from my house. You can kind of see it in the background there. And here's something else you want to keep an eye out for. Any of these, see if I can get it all in frame for you. Any of these poking out of the ground, that is some indication of a buried utility. In this case, fiber optic cables. And you see there's actually a little pad on the floor there, on the ground. We don't want to be cutting off anybody's Fios TV, right? So when you see that, you know there's an entire line going along this side of the road. If I was to survey this land, I would know to avoid the entire corridor along this side of this road. So this is the old historic road that separated the Hendricks farm that I'm on from the later Hendricks farm across the street. And this was the original entrance and carriage house for the old Hendricks property that we will be investigating. So this carriage house, like I said, it's pretty much just a garage, but it's a garage prior to the time of cars. So what would I expect here? Probably some form of driveway later on, because my guess is that they did park something mechanical in that garage once cars were invented. So I would expect probably a driveway gravel right here. And then you see we have a rock wall, which is outlining the bedrock outcrop supporting my house. Next we have the old front yard. So this is the historic front porch that once faced the son's property across the way. What would you expect to find in somebody's front yard? Not a lot, right? Your front yard you generally keep clean. That's a social area. Another thing to look out for, do you have any statuary of pets or anything like that on the property? If you do, you probably have a buried pet. So I'm seeing right here that there is a utility pole in this brush, and there's no overhead lines going to the house. If there are no overhead lines going to the house, that means this is a drop pole. It means that electricity is coming to the house here in this pole, then going underground and connecting to the house at that corner. So you're going to want to look for where the electricity goes into the house. You see it's dropping down, and then those are buried cables hooked up to that pole over there, which means that this ground in between that pole and my house has all of the electrical line going to my house. This is a pump head, a well pump head. This is where my fresh water comes from in my house. If you see anything like that, that is your plumbing. Of course, there was an historic open well on this property. That was in the side yard right here. Historic maps show some type of well in this area, although I have not rediscovered it. It is illegal to have an open well right now. You know, you've heard the stories of kids falling into wells. So most of those have been capped. Mine has. There are historic archaeological sites where if the site was just abandoned, that well may still be open. And I have worked at sites where we worked for 2 years in this overgrown thicket. And the third year we come back and find out we've been working right next to this open well that anybody could have fallen through any moment. So keep your eyes open for open water wells. So I showed you these propane tanks in the earlier video. I just wanted to point them out again in that notice that these are next to this old outbuilding. They're not servicing that old outbuilding, right? You wouldn't put up 2 huge propane tanks next to an outbuilding. These are servicing the main house. This is how I heat my house in the winter. This is how I cook my food. Which means that this propane is going to the house through underground buried cables, pipes. So what's one thing we wouldn't do? Dig anywhere between those tanks and the house. Out in the country, we don't really have too many options for cable. And so most folks have a satellite dish. That satellite dish has to face south usually and have an unobstructed view of the sky, which means that these will be placed far away from a house. In my case, this is probably about 50 yards or so from my house, which again means buried cable. And this is not going to be something that's marked on some utility grid. This is something that you as a homeowner should know, or somebody has to come out and survey and mark. So I've mentioned this little outbuilding a few times now. Let's take a peek inside it and see whether or not we want to explore it further. Just using my selfie stick, you can see that there's just a lot of old crap in here. Those are shingles, old doors. Not sure what that blue thing is in the background. So what did we learn from just a peek inside there? We would need serious gloves. We would need long sleeve shirts, maybe even some face mask material, just in case you'd be inhaling any type of dangerous chemicals or anything that might have been stored in there. Old outbuildings are a hazard waiting to happen. So you have to be extra careful when you're working with the crap that people would throw in their outbuildings. By the way, I didn't put that crap in there. That's how I bought it. So coming up my driveway, you see that this driveway is the new front of the house. The old front of the house is facing the road. In about the year 2000, it switched to this side of the house. What was this road then? Well, having worked and lived here for a while, I know that this road actually is a field edge road that continued up here. So I'm going to expect, if I do a shovel test pit right here, that I would end up with field edge road. One of those access points to access this field here. We also have a relatively new outbuilding. Despite some of the windows and doors on it, it is not an historic structure. How do I know? It's built with modern 6x6s and 2x4s. Now it's hard to tell, but I am right next to the septic for my house. Pretty much nobody but the homeowner knows where their septic is. It's intentionally buried, intentionally hidden, and if you hit it with a shovel, you might make a mess. So be aware, be careful. If you end up digging in something that looks like very, very artificial stone, very like it's meant to filter things, right? So sand and pebbles, that usually is encasing some form of septic system. So if you're digging in an area and you find just this weird mix of sand and gravel, pause and think why. It might be a septic, might be a driveway, you never know, but it's something to look out for. One of the first things you're going to assess when you get on site is surface visibility. All right, so when you're in my lawn, there is almost zero surface visibility. We could not just walk over this lawn and say what might be beneath. However, a lot of archaeology occurs in agricultural fields. There, actually, you can see some surface visibility. So if I were to put together a team to survey this field, as opposed to my property, I actually would start with a surface walkover, a formal surface walkover, a pedestrian survey, where we are just looking for any surface indications of features. Here in my yard, that really only would be limited to built architecture, right? Nothing under the surface is going to be indicated at all because of this thick lawn. So therefore, any additional testing for any historic structures will have to be done through excavations rather than surface survey. My backyard is a mix of mowed lawn and thick underbrush. I left this portion just to grow back for two reasons. One, I didn't feel like mowing the lawn for 1.5 acres was really a good use of energy and fuel. And also, the deer love it. So we have various deer populations that come through here and often make their beds. I've made a little walking trail through my backyard. And so we're gonna have to consider two different things. One is what we'll need while we excavate or survey in the open mowed areas, and what must we consider in the overgrown areas. While you're doing your walkover, you may not have the chance to see any type of crop marks, but since I've actually lived here for 10 years, I do know that at certain times of the year, there is a patch of weird grass right here at the corner of my property. I'm pretty sure there is some type of buried structure right at the corner of the interior fence of my property. That is one thing we are going to explore in this class. A crop mark is something where the vegetation does not grow properly because of some type of disturbance underneath the ground. You cannot see it right now, but at certain times of stress, the vegetation will either be more or less vigorous than the surrounding area if there's a buried feature. So always keep your eyes open for some type of marks in the surface vegetation. So the area in between that outbuilding and the creek that I showed you is the most likely area of activity for this historic property. For one reason, there was a latrine, a privy, an outhouse, somewhere in this area. So in looking for a place to dig, I am very interested in this part of my backyard. Because there, right by that satellite dish, is the intermittent stream, our outbuildings, and the carriage house actually is back in that thicket as well. So we have a cluster of historic structures, everything pointing towards that intermittent stream. So that's your first video assignment. Do what I just did. Give me an initial walkover of your property. Tell me a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your property, what you expect in certain areas, and what hazards you have already anticipated. Of course, I also assume that you are following the other assignments, which are to call 811, which is in this area called Miss Utility, to make sure that this is verified by an authority.